Hey there, Fletcher from All Things Overlanding here, and today is going to be an exciting video for 3rd Gen Frontier people because I'm doing the how to install the Freedom Outfitters fog light replacement brackets for aftermarket lights, and I'm doing a little bit of an unorthodox install with these really big Novsight pods. So these things are not really meant to fit in this bracket, but I have an idea for how to make them fit with a tiny bit of fabrication that pretty much anybody can do. So again, I'm going to walk you through the install of the brackets, I'm going to walk you through the install of the lights into the brackets, and then I'm going to show you the whole thing and show you the results at the end. I'm also going to show you before and after. So if you're looking to upgrade your stock fog lights on your 3rd Gen Frontier, stay tuned.
Understand where it came from, but you got it, my got it. It began in the land of the sandstorm. I fought it, though I wanted everything to do with what you give to me.
Alright, so welcome to my very messy garage. Apologies for that, but this is the life that I live. I'm going to be showing you my idea for mounting these lights. So let me start by showing you how big these lights are. So, one of the things that I've seen online is that people say, hey, I want my lights to fill the inside of the bracket, right? And if you mount a light on a sort of stock mounting bracket and sit it on these little holes here, then it's gonna sit up a little bit higher, right? You're gonna have a little bit of a gap. So what I wanted to do was, I wanted to take these larger Novsight spots, basically, and mount 2 of them in the bracket. So let me show you that. So when you put 2 of these side by side, they really nicely fill the gaps in the bracket, but it doesn't leave a lot of room for mounting, right? Like in these channels on the bottom, I'm pretty much flush up against them. So my thought is I'm actually going to use a couple of brackets. These came with my rooftop tent, and they're basically U-bolt brackets. So there are bolts that drop down through this, and then you use it to sandwich it up to the bed rack on your truck. I had these laying around because I had custom mounts that came with my bed rack. So these are nice, beefy pieces of steel. They've already got holes drilled into them, and when I put them on the bracket here, just to see how they fit, the holes actually line up pretty well with that bracket. Now I may need to use a drill press, I may need to drill them out a little bit. If you don't have some U-bolt brackets or something like this sitting around, I'm gonna try and find some online, and I'll put a link in the description below if I can. Otherwise, you can always go to like a Lowe's or a Home Depot and buy sort of like sheet steel in a long piece like this, and then you could just use a drill press or even a handheld drill and drill out holes where you want them to be able to mount it to the bracket. But my thought is I'm going to mount this to the bottom of it. I'm going to drop a bolt and a nut down through it to hold it in place, and I'm going to put a slight bend in it. I'm just going to put it in a vise and use a big hammer to bend this up a little bit. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the stock brackets that come with it, but instead of mounting the light vertically like this, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the brackets to pull this back. So it's actually going to kind of go behind the light, and then I'm going to attach this bolt from the bracket to this piece that's bent. So, picture that bracket. I can't hold everything all at once. Picture that bracket down here, this with a bend up in it, right? So I'm going to hammer this up so that it matches that, and then I'm going to put that bolt through there. So basically the stock bracket that comes with the light will attach to the top of this bracket. This will bend about 90 degrees down to this, and then go under the bracket. I will attach this piece first, then I'll attach this piece with this bracket, and then they'll be on there. They'll be held in place, basically sitting in the bracket, but then held from behind with this piece of steel that I'm going to run out the back. So it's really super simple, right? There's nothing super crazy about it, but I know that it does require a little bit of fabrication. You're not just mounting them that way, but these lights are also about $100-ish for a pair. You need 2 pairs. So about $200 worth of lights, $200 for the brackets. So I'm actually going to use these as off-road lights. I'm going to wire them in using the stock harness so that I can just flip the switch and turn them on using the stock functionality of my stock in the truck. But that way I can have off-road lights that I can turn on and off really easily from inside the truck. I don't have to wire anything else up. I don't have to run any wires into the cab. It'll work basically like stock functionality. So let's get to bending these brackets that I've got in mind for this, and let's see if this works. All right, so one note just to start is I'm gonna mount these brackets again on top of the cord here, right? Rather than underneath of the light. And then I'm going to mount it so you can see it's not symmetrical, it's asymmetrical, right? So instead of mounting this facing up so that it's farther away and I need more metal to get up to mount it to, I'm mounting this in the down position. So again, if you're trying to replicate what I'm doing, when you put the bracket on, make sure that it's in this down position like this so that we have as little distance to make up with the bracket that I'm fabricating as possible. All right, so once you have your bracket sort of softly on there, right? They're just sort of finger tight. The bolts on the side, you can always tighten them down once you get them in the exact position that you want them. Once I have that on, what I'm doing is I'm trying to figure out exactly where I need to bend my fabricated quote-unquote bracket that I'm going to use. Now at first I was going to try and use both holes, but as you can see, at least in my instance, it doesn't quite match up perfectly, so I kind of got a little short side, but I'm using spare bolts and nuts that I had laying around. I've got these pretty hefty bolts with these lock nuts that I'm going to use, and I've got washers for them that fit as well. So I think with one really tightly mounted lock nutted bolt, this thing should be in pretty good shape. Not to mention that I am going to put them as flush to the front of the bracket as possible, so they really shouldn't move a whole lot anyways, but I'm going to tighten the bejesus out of them with some pretty hefty hardware, this big piece of steel, and the bolts. So one thing to keep in mind is that the thickness of your bolt holding your bracket on the bottom may impact your lights, right? So mine, even with that bolt, as you can see, are still going to sit pretty flush in here, I think, because I went with as thin a bolt as I possibly could. And then what you can see here is when I set this bracket down here, right, I can see the point where I need to bend it. So I'm probably going to go actually a little bit past, because as you can see, this is kind of at an angle. So I'm going to go to about right here, and I'm going to use a marker. You can either use a dry erase or you can use like a Sharpie. It doesn't really matter, right? But I like to use dry erase, so if I mess up, I can erase it and then reuse it. But so if you kind of go at a 90 down from there, and here's the thing, if it's a tiny bit off, it's not going to hurt anything, right? So I can adjust this up and down. I can make it more level, more straight. I'm just going to go slightly past it, and I'm going to mark it. And then I'm going to put my bend right there on the line. I'm going to bend this up to about a 90. And then I'm going to put my bolt through this bracket and through this hole in this, and that's how I'm going to mount it. I'm going to tighten this down, tighten that down, tighten this bolt down, tighten this bottom bolt down, and then that's basically how I'm going to hold it. So again, it's up against the front of the bracket here, and then this is going to be sort of pushing it from the back and holding it, basically making like an L bracket to tie this thing in and push it against the front of the mount. And then once everything's tight, it should just stay right there, I think. At least that's my idea. All right, so one thing that I've already learned is I had this bracket that I'm fabricating, quote unquote, in here in this first line on the inside of the fog light bracket. I ended up moving it out because that actually lines up better with the center of the back of the light here. So anyways, you know, you may have to make some adjustments, right? Like this is sort of a DIY thing, and your materials may be a little bit different than mine. But so basically what I've done is I've pushed the light as far to the left towards the inside of this fog light bracket as possible. It's sitting on top of the bolt that is holding this piece loosely in here. And then, as you can see, it's kind of hard to see there, but the hole from the bracket is lining up perfectly with this bottom hole. Once we've got that fabricated, I'm going to start working on the second one because I want to loosely test fit everything just to make sure it fits before I tighten everything down. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to remove the light from the bracket. I'm going to get this tightened down. I'm going to re-test fit it on there just to make sure that I've got it in the right spot, right? Because you have a lot of flexibility thanks to the bracket. The bracket gives you a lot of options. So that's kind of where I think it's going to be. And then I'm going to tighten that down. Then I'm going to, again, test fit this thing back in there, make sure that my bolt will line up, get my bolt set in here so that it can go through this bracket, put that through, then I'll tighten that down next, and then we'll do the same for the second one, right? You kind of have to have your brackets on already because there has to be room for them both to fit side by side, and you're not going to have room to tighten that down later. So you're just going to have to sort of tighten things down one at a time as you can, as it makes sense to make it all fit in here, right? It's a little bit of fabrication. If you haven't done anything like this simple sort of bracket making before, just so you know, all that I did, there's no special tools needed, was I took this, again, this U-bolt piece, right? I drew my line. You can kind of see the black mark right there on the crease where I bent it. And then literally all I did was I sandwiched it in a vise at that line. And then I took a big 4-pound hammer and I just bent it down. I just hammered it until it was flat and about 90. Mine actually went a little bit over, so I may need to hammer it back just a tiny bit to make it a little bit more even, but it does seem to line up pretty well with the bend in that bracket that came with the light. So anyways, all you're doing is taking your piece of steel, measuring where your holes need to be, and then bending it using a hammer and a vise until it gets to the angle that you need, and that's it. And then again, I'm just gonna bolt this onto the frame here for the lights, bolt the lights in there, hook them up, and we're done. All right guys, so as you can see, I've got the first one mounted in here. That is mounted. I've gone ahead and I've put my second light mount in this sort of diagonal triangular end piece here, and I've marked my line, so I'm gonna go ahead and bend that, and then I think the outside one should actually be easier. Another tip here is I went ahead and on the light bracket, because this light's gonna be, you know, sandwiched right up against that other light, I went ahead and I tightened down the inside bolt all the way because I won't be able to access that. They're literally bolt to bolt inside that mount just to get them to fit just right. So I went ahead and I tightened down this side. I can still sort of move it a little bit because the other side is still loose. So then what my plan is again, get this in, get it lined up, then tighten down this other side, and then that should stop it from moving because both sides will be tight then. So again, let's get this thing bent, let's get this in, let's see how it fits, and then after that we'll move on to installing it in the truck. Alright guys, so I've got one side done. I think it looks pretty good. You do have to be a little bit careful. So basically I ended up intentionally sort of doing a little bit of an offset, sort of from the outside to the inside, and the reason for that is that these lights have these sort of Allen wrench screws that stick out the end. So when I was trying to put them side by side, it was pushing it out too much and it wasn't quite lining up with the actual bracket itself. So what I ended up doing was just slightly offsetting it, right, so that the bolt for the outside light actually sits a little bit behind it, and then it just creates just a little bit of offset. So again, I think it'll look pretty good because the bumper sort of bends out this way anyways, so I think that will kind of match the lines of the truck, the fact that it's offset. But they do sit in there pretty straight and pretty nice. I'll have to check the light output when I put them in the truck, but I mean, these things are pretty massive, and I think they're gonna put out a ton of light. So now I do need to cut these Deutsch connectors off the end. I need to splice these together. I'm gonna show you guys how I do that too. And again, then I'm gonna cut the stock harness off the existing fog lights. I'm gonna reuse that so that I can make it plug and play basically with the stock harness in the truck. But again, then just flip the stock on inside the truck for fog lights, and these things should come on. So let's do the other side, and then we'll get into the install in the truck. All right, so now it's time to install the fog lights. My first thought was just to go up through the fender liner, and I did kind of pull this up and out of the way, and you can get some pretty good access back in here by doing that. There's where the fog light goes up there. I was able to take out the stock LED fog light, which is basically just 3 screws. You can see there are 2 on the top there, 1 down on the bottom. The one on the bottom and the one on the right, really easy to reach. The one on the left, pretty tricky. I had to get a long 10 mil, these are all 10 mils. I had to get a long 10 mil socket and a wrench and kind of reach up in there with my left hand, feel out the bolt, put my right hand up there, find the bolt, and kind of line up the socket with my left hand. And then once I got that on, I was able to loosen it up, and I was able to remove this light without taking the bumper off. With the lights that I'm putting in, you can see they're significantly deeper than this. Now I did measure from the hole where the stock one goes back to the metal pieces in the grill back here, and there does seem to be plenty of room. The only problem is you can't feed it up through here. There's just not enough room to get it up and around all this actual metal, structural metal in here to get these big lights in there. So my thought is I'm just going to remove this whole front fascia so that I can get a really clean install, get them bolted right up in there without having to worry about bending them or, you know, damaging the lights or the bumper or anything like that. Get the lights mounted into their spots there, and then just put the whole front fascia back on the truck, plug them in, wire them up, and call it a day. So that's what we're going to do. So at this point in the video, I'm going to kind of walk you through this whole removal thing. I also have a 2023 with the technology package, and every video that I've seen of people removing the grill or the front fascia does not have this piece. So I'm going to talk you through that a little bit and what to do if you have the technology package. I'm assuming that's what this is for. Or if you see this thing in behind your grill in your Frontier, how to kind of get that out, how to maneuver it around so that you can get the grill out. And I'm going to tell you exactly how to pull out this whole front fascia to, again, make this fog light install just as easy as possible. So starting over here, there were 2 Phillips head screws that were in these 2 holes. You pop those out. That releases this fender flare. And then you can pull this out and away. And then underneath of that, there were 2 more screws in these holes, both Phillips heads, that hold the fender liner in. So then I removed those 2. And then up here, really high, in that hole right there, there was a 10 mil that runs up through there, and that holds this side fascia on. So you do have to remove that. So you remove these 2 Phillips head screws down here, the other 2 in the actual fender itself. You have to pull off, there's a plastic clip that needs like a pry tool or a flathead screwdriver, and there's another one up there, and I pulled those 2 out as well. That's pretty much it. I haven't touched any of the rest of these bolts or anything else holding the fender liner in, just those front pieces. Then that is gonna free up the side of this fender here. Now, underneath, there's a few more things you have to do. Under here, there are these little like sort of plastic plugs. They look like that are in there. I just pulled those out just to be safe. I don't think they actually do a whole lot, but I just pulled those out again just to be safe. Down here is a 10 mil on the bottom of the black part of the grill. Then next I pulled off the aluminum armor here. Now these are 14 mil bolts, and there are 4 of them. One note is on this side, you see that little tab sticking out there? If you undo this side first, you can undo those two 14 mil bolts. It will hang on that little tab. Then that allows you, especially if you're doing it by yourself like I am, to undo the 14s on the other side, and it's not going to fall on your head. Then you can kind of slide back over here, slide it off that tab, and it pops right off. So it's a pretty nice little thoughtful feature that they put there. But again, just 4 14 mil bolts, that comes off. And then underneath there are 4 10 mil bolts that hold the center gray part of this bumper on. Then of course it's the same over here. There's a 10 mil right up underneath of there that you need to remove. You remove the same 2 Phillips head screws here, and then the 2 Phillips head screws underneath, and then that bolt up in the hole, and then that's pretty much it. Then what you do is you reach your fingers down in here beside the headlight, and you can see there's this clip here. If you can't get your fingers in there, you can use a plastic trim tool. I didn't have to, though. I actually was able to get my fingers down in there, and you pull out just a little bit. It's going to feel scary, but don't be afraid. Just be very cautious and pull softly. You pull that away. You kind of pull away here. There's little clips that hold it down into here. Once you pull that away, make sure that you're holding the flare away too, so you don't scratch up your fender. Then you can kind of pull this thing down and away. What I did next, and you could do this in the reverse order. You could take the grill off first, but I sort of got this loose where I could feel that it was all loose. And then I realized that the grill was holding it up, so then I moved over to the grill. Again, there are 7 tabs, and basically the way those work is similar to a second gen. So if you had a second gen truck, I'll show you. They just have 7 of these little tabs. You push up from the bottom to free the tab, and then just kind of keep pressure on the grill, pulling out and away from the truck. And then that will kind of keep those tabs depressed. And then once you get all 7 of those pushed, then it will let you pull that out. I did remove, there's this plastic cover that attaches to the back of the grill. There are 4 little Torx head bolts that hold that to that. I went ahead and just removed that too, just to make things a little bit easier. Then that gave me access to this piece, which again, I think is part of the technology package. I'm assuming that these are all probably the sonar sensors that come up through here. So again, I just removed 2 10 mil. So I just removed 2 10 mil bolts that were at the back here, and that pretty much totally frees it. It's pretty much just sitting in here now, attached by these harnesses. And so the reason that I did that is because it's really hard to get to these tabs for the grill with this thing in the way. So by removing that, it allowed me to kind of maneuver it around, move it around a little bit so that I could reach down in here and get to these. On these sides, it looks like you can't get to the sides. These are actually like really soft. They're almost like rubbery. So you can reach through there to reach that last tab over there to get that off on both sides. Same over here. It's kind of like a rubbery material. And then before you fully remove the grill, you need to just depress this little button here and pull this front camera harness off. So that's the harness that attaches to your front camera if you've got one on your Frontier. But by pulling that off, then that allows you to take the full grill off. And then I'm just leaving this here. I'm going to leave it loose so that I can make sure that I get all my clips back in. And then I'm going to put my 2 10 mils back in. And I'm just going to go in the reverse order to fix all that. But the final pieces that you need to take off to remove this front fascia is there are 3 of these flat little clips right here, and you need to just use a flathead screwdriver or like a clip pry bar, something like that. Pop these 3 off of there, and then those should be the last 3 that are holding on this front fascia. Now be careful when you do that, of course. You don't want to drop the whole thing and scratch it up. But once you get those 3 off, you should be able to just pull this fascia away. And again, my goal is I'm going to take it and set it on some cardboard or this extra rooftop tent mattress that I've got in here. Set it down. I'm going to mount the brackets for the fog lights onto the back of them, and then I'm basically going to let the cords hang loose, and I'm going to get them all wired up so that they will plug straight into the stock harness. So before you put everything back in place, you may just want to test it, kind of get it to hang up here a little bit, and then just test the lights to make sure that they're working okay and that they're aimed okay, and then do the steps in reverse to get everything reassembled. But so let's finish these last 3 clips here, and I will get the bumper removed, we'll get the lights installed, we'll get the bumper back on, and then we'll see how they look. So the stock harness is kind of an OEM style, which is fine, but on the actual light itself, it's just this sort of built-in plug. Now I did unplug it. You can pull up on this little tab on the bottom there, and you can pull it out. If you pull this off of here, there's no wires, it's just sort of a plug. So I'm sure that you could probably find, I'm sure it's some sort of a standard like an H4 and H11 or something, some sort of a plug. So if you really wanted to mess with it and try and figure out what it was, this is what it looks like. You probably could sort of fabricate your own plug and play harness. Here's what I'm going to do though. This is pretty straightforward. So this just has a positive and a negative wire. I'm assuming that the red is positive and the other one, the grayish, bluish one, is negative. So I'm going to snip this harness off. I'm going to give it to the next person, whoever wants to buy these, LED stock fog lights, maybe for an SV or something that doesn't have fog lights. I'm going to sell them the actual whole light and the harness with it, so that all they have to do is then plug the wires. I'll leave enough wire here for somebody to be able to hook them up, so hopefully somebody else can get some use out of these stock LEDs, because they're not bad, they're just could be better. So then with the remaining positive and negative, what I've done, the Novsights come with these really nice Deutsch connectors, and I haven't cut them off the lights yet. So my thinking is, you know, there's one per light, so I need a pair per side. So I basically spliced the positive and negative from each pair together into one with these crimps, and then I'm going to crimp the other end to the OEM cords coming out of here, and then I'm going to basically make them plug and play using the connectors that came with the Novsight lights. So I'll just make use of the Novsight Deutsch connectors, and that way you can just plug and unplug the lights as necessary. They're also pretty nice little Deutsch connector plugs with the little waterproof seals, gaskets, whatever you want to call them. So I'm just going to make use of those, and then I'm going to heat shrink these together. They basically crimped right now, and then I'm going to crimp on the other end, and then I'm going to heat shrink them to seal them up and make them waterproof, and then I'm going to make it so that they are plug and play. So I've got the Deutsch connectors wired in, cinched together, melted down, sealed up to the stock lights. I just tested them, they work great. So I'm going to put the fascia back on now. I'm going to plug in the Deutsch connectors that came with the Novsight lights that are now perma wired to the truck into the connectors coming off the back of the lights, and we should be good to go. So let's get everything put back together, and then I'm going to show you guys the results. All right guys, so I'm getting ready to seal it all up. As you can see, got everything sort of sealed and crimped down. I did use a little zip tie on that little hole that you see right back there in the frame, just to sort of hold the wires up, just so that they didn't droop too much or hang out the bottom. But yeah, using the stock Deutsch connectors that came with the Novsight lights, they are now plug and play. One note that's really fascinating, and it's kind of hard to see on the video here, I know, is that on the driver's side, on my truck, it's 2023 Pro 4X, the blue was positive and the red was negative. So coming out of the stock harness, when I cut the wires, the red is actually negative on this side and the blue was positive, which is opposite of what I expected. And on the other side, I wired it up in reverse. The red was positive and the blue was negative. But what happened was I wired up the driver's side the same as the passenger side, and I turned on the lights and only the passenger fog lights came on. So then I got to thinking, you know what if they're reversed? And I switched them and it worked. So again, if you are wiring up aftermarket fog lights using the stock wiring harness and the stalk inside the truck to turn on the lights, on my truck anyways, on the driver's side, blue positive, red negative. On the passenger side, red positive, blue negative. Just an important note there. All right guys, so the lights are in. They look pretty good, I think. Definitely fill up the fog light brackets pretty well. They're big. They're even maybe a tiny bit too big for these holes, but they do fit with that modification for the extended brackets that I showed you earlier in the video. So they do fit and they do look pretty good. They are super bright too. So now when it gets dark tonight, I'm going to take it out. I'm going to do a video of the brightness compared to the stock fog lights. I'll show you guys that and then we'll wrap up the video. All right guys, so as you probably noticed from the title of this video and then also the notes in the description if you read that, unfortunately this didn't work out quite the way that I intended it to. And you know, that happens sometimes when you're doing a project and you're doing something that no one else has ever done. It may not always work out the way that you want. So in the case of these lights, the Novsight lights are fantastic. They're super bright, but they are a spotlight pattern, which means that they're going to go in a straight line and they're going to shoot far out. So again, I'm going to start here by showing you the stock LED headlights and then the stock LED fog lights. They light up not very far and not very bright, but they do light up a little bit in sort of a thin line below the headlights. Now, what I found was that I didn't realize originally was that the bumper actually has a ton of angle to it. So when you put the spotlights in there, they kind of shoot off to the side of the truck. And again, here at the end of this video, I'm going to show you what that looks like. All right, guys, so just to give you sort of a flat comparison, I wanted to pull into the driveway. My bumper is right on the back of the driveway, and so it'll be the same when I put the new lights on. Right now, these are DRLs only. Here is with headlights. So again, you can see the nice crisp clean cutoff of the LEDs, which is really nice. And then with fog lights, it just adds a little bit of extra light, right? Like it has a really clean, nice cutoff too. But you can see how little it actually adds, right? Like, I mean, it maybe adds like a foot or two of usable light. So this is the OEM stock fog lights, just headlights, just DRLs. As you can tell, the Novsight lights do put out a ton more lumens, a ton more light than the original fog lights, but they are very spotlight-like. And because of the angle of the Frontier bumper, they do angle off to the sides quite a bit, so I'm gonna have to take them out on some trails and test them. But if you want them to be more forward-facing, you'd wanna go with something that's not as much of a spot and more of a flood. And if you make it smaller, then you'll be able to turn it a little bit on the bracket, the Freedom bracket, so that it can face more forward. So it just kind of depends on your light setup. But so this is just headlights right here, and then here's what the fog's on. I mean, as you can see, it puts out a ton of light. They kind of project straight out to the sides, right? Now, when I'm not enclosed in with these vehicles here, like, I mean, you can see how much light they put out. They even light up out in front too, just because of how much light they put out. It's just different. But so definitely much greater light output than before, but it's a different sort of sideways facing light. So you can see how much off to the side, but I mean, like, it's super bright. I mean, it'll light up in front of you, beside you, everywhere. All right, guys, so that was the lights. So a couple thoughts, kind of my final thoughts here. Brackets from Freedom, awesome. Novsight lights, awesome. The Novsight lights may not be the best option for this application. Again, it depends on what you want, right? I think that they're fine. I think that they're super bright. I mean, they're amazingly bright. They'd be great for like ditch lights or maybe like bumper mounted spots, which is what they are, right? They're spotlights. I think they're gonna be great for off-road and trails and stuff, especially in more wide open places. Like I just went to Wyoming pretty recently, and there's just huge plains and stuff. So if we were driving at night, these lights would light up everything around you for a mile. Which is fantastic. But again, if you want the lights to be more front facing, then you may need to go with something smaller. Like there's a guy on Instagram, KPX Overland. He has a really beautiful truck with some beautiful Baja S2s in there. They're much smaller lights, so you can put them on the bracket and you can kind of angle them where you want them to go, so you can get them to go out in front of your truck. With these bigger lights, again, great option for a lot of things. But if you don't want them to point off to the sides a lot, then you may want to go with something a little bit smaller. It just depends on the look that you're going for, right? I think they look fantastic. I think they put out a ton of light, but it just kind of depends on your setup. Was a lot of work having to take off the front fascia, but I think in the end it was worth it. I also knocked out some other little things that I was working on and learned a lot about how the front end of the truck comes apart. So hopefully that was helpful information for you guys. If it was, click that like button. If you're not already, make sure to click the subscribe button. I'd love to have you as a subscriber. In the description down below are going to be links to the brackets. There's also going to be a discount code down there. So if you want some of these, you can get 10% off with my code. I hope that helps you. There will also be a link to these lights, which I'm a really big fan of. I really like them. I think they're really high quality. They're nice lights. And they're about half to a third of the price of some of the bigger name brand ones. So if you're a budget person like me and you're looking for some good bright lights that fit in these brackets, at least with a little bit of modification, these would be a good option for you. Also in the description below will be links to all my other social channels, so if you want to follow along anywhere else, I'd love to have you there. And then last but not least, there's a link to my website where I've got stickers and patches, overlanding and camping themes, so if you're into that kind of stuff, check that out. And then there's also a link to my Patreon where we've got a 24/7 Discord. We chat all the time, it's a lot of fun. And the Newbie Overlanders Facebook group, which is totally free to join. It has about 13,500 people in it right now, and it's growing every day. But tons of new folks and experienced folks kind of just helping each other out, and no bullying like in the big groups. So again, if you want to join that, go check it out. But again, thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.